Hello, hi guys, and Assalamu alaikum. I hope all of you are fine. Well, my name is Yusuf, and I'm going to be talking about another topic which is going to be extremely important as far as European history of CSS is concerned. If you guys remember that we started off with the French Revolution and we talked about it in detail, and the discussions that we guys did in it were related to how the French Revolution started, what were the things that came in it. Eventually, we discussed the whole thing, and then eventually we even went on with this thing of that how the French Revolution, changed the entire system of. I would say that like the entire history got rewritten as far as Europe is concerned, because monarchy was something that was ruling on at that particular time, and it eventually got finished, and the ordinary people, as if you guys remember in the previous lectures which I told you about, that there were three states in total, and the third state that we talked about was of the people who were covering almost 98% of the French population, and they only had one vote as compared to the clergy and the nobles. So this all thing just changed on, and the purpose was very good. But eventually what happened, guys, as you know, humans are like that, so that's what happened. And eventually it started off and the initiative was really good, but as time passed on, it lost its way. The revolution lost its way. Although they were able to get over and get rid of the king, Louis XVI, but eventually it became radical with the element of Robespierre and his followers, and there was a reign of terror that we guys witnessed. I would say that like it was something which was quite pleasing, because the entire motive of the French Revolution just changed up as it became radical, and the people who were concerned with it, it didn't turn out to be quite good with it. So from then onwards, then here came the one and only Napoleon Bonaparte. If you guys remember, I literally described about Napoleon Bonaparte, and I told you people about what he was, what his character was, how the things were there, and what impact did he have on France. Well, if you guys sum it up, so if you guys remember it up, it was not only what he did at that particular time, but it was the entire impact not only on France, but also the entire Europe. It just transformed the entire Europe in such a manner that everyone was now concerned with France. And there were a lot of things that was here because of the fact from monarch we still moved on to a dictatorship government, and the things were literally quite different. So this is how the things went along. Today, after the demise of Napoleon Bonaparte, we are going to be discussing after the demise of Napoleon Bonaparte, his death and his end, what was the thing that eventually happened. That is going to be something that we guys are going to be talking about today. So I hope you people are ready for it, because I'm really enthusiastic to tell you people about that thing out. So guys, without any ado, let's start on. Today we're going to be talking about the Concert of Europe. Well, before we move on to it, we need to have a slight background of what we are going to be talking about. The Concert of Europe is something that was, it was formed after the Napoleon era ended. And the purpose of the Concert of Europe was what? The purpose was very simple, guys. The purpose was this, that they wanted that now the Europeans, they don't fight among each other, and they just come over this entire system of fighting with each other. And instead of that, they wanted to have something in which they could set the old regime, and at the same time they wanted a stability as far as the continent is concerned. And that is the reason why the Concert of Europe was held on. And in Concert of Europe, we had all the superpowers who were present at that particular time in Europe. And those superpowers included Russia, Prussia, Austria, United Kingdom, and obviously Italy also was a major part of it. So all these individuals who were there in that particular thing were literally someone that, they were eventually a part of it, and the purpose of them was what? They wanted to have peace and stability, and there were also other things that they wanted. They wanted old things to be back on, because if you talk about Russia, the czars who were there, they wanted their supremacy to be back. Then there were a few kings who wanted to again come back into the rulership, and they wanted that, like, this revolution thing, it just gets wiped off. So then eventually the things came back to normal and everything just went on like that. So guys, if I sum it up, then what are the things that we are going to be talking about today? Things that we're going to be talking about today, they're going to be going on after the Napoleonic Wars. What happened? What were the things that we came up? We came across the era of Metternich. Metternich, again, a very famous and a renowned individual as far as European history is concerned. And I'll tell you people about Metternich, and I'll tell you what he did and why he was recognized as such on. But the major thing that I want to tell you people about is this. Although all these, countries, they joined up together to form peace and stability, and they wanted a decision to be taken together. But as you know, human nature is like that. So that's what happened. Eventually, they couldn't last for long. And after that, they faced two revolutions that were there, the revolution of 1830 and the revolution of 1848. And after that, then again, there were few phases that were there. Basically, if we have a look at it, this era eventually had two phases. One phase is known as the Age of Metternich, and the second phase is the other one. But the most catastrophic event that happened after the Congress of Europe was what? Well, it was the World War One. And in the World War One, we saw how the world eventually got divided into parts. What happened, how the things went along, and it totally changed the structure of a lot of different places, especially if we talk about as far as the Ottoman Empire is concerned, as far as the unification of Germany is concerned, as far as a lot of other things that are related to it are concerned. So there were a lot of things that eventually happened. So I'm going to be taking you guys along a journey in which I want you people to just visualize it. Just imagine how the things would have been at that particular time. So guys, I hope you people are ready, because I am ready and I'm extremely enthusiastic, and I want you people to be ready on that thing up. So without any ado, let's move on, guys. So as I told you people about the basic events that were there in it, now eventually we're going to go on with the first happening that happened. After the Napoleon era ended up, and Napoleon eventually got defeated, and then he got exiled again, and after his death, there all these states that were there, which I talked about, they just gathered up and they formed a League of Nations, in other words, that was there, or the Concert of Europe that was there, in which all of them just sat together, and they made few decisions that were there for the purpose of having things done in such a manner that all of them are going to be coordinating with one another. And the basic purpose is going to be what? They're going to be promoting this thing up, that they have their colonies that they have already formed. They want to, don't interfere in each other's matters. But as it is always said, with great power comes great responsibility. And the power that they possessed, that power eventually was, the key. And whenever there is the element of greed in it, it eventually can never work on. And all of them who just got together, they had their own personal motives. So whenever your personal interest is there, that is something which is literally very important. So personal interest was the key over here, guys, and that is the reason why I would say that the concept of Europe was something that literally led to the World War One in a very, I would say, in a very, it was bound to happen. There was no reason behind that it was not happening. Okay, so guys, as I was telling you people about it, that the main motive that these organizations, or I won't say organizations, I would say these countries had, it was what, that they had their own personal motives that were there, and those personal motives obviously led to all the happenings that took place afterwards. Anyhow, let's take it in the like in the phase that it should go on. Now, Europe basically witnessed an era of Metternich. Now, all of you would be wondering who Metternich was and from where did he come from. He was basically Austrian chancellor and a foreign minister of Austria. This guy had a huge impact at this span of time. From 1814 to like 1914, if we have a look at it, all this time was the time of the Congress of Europe, where they used to sit down, discuss things up. There were a lot of meetings that took place in different or like times and durations, but eventually it has been divided into two phases. Why? Because of the first phase was eventually from, if you have a look at it, from 1814 to 1860. Now, this entire phase belonged to one man, and that man is Metternich. Although there came two revolutions at that particular time span of time, one revolution popped up at 1830, and the second one obviously popped up at a revolution of 1848. But this guy was so smart, so cunning, and I would say so clever in what regard that he wanted the old regime to be present. And being the foreign minister, he knew each and everything quite well. And Austria was really dominant under his, reign. He was someone who knew how to tackle each and every individual, and he took it from a very different perspective. And the things that he did, they were simply mind blowing. So, all in all, if we look at it, if we divide it up from 1814 to 1860, that would be the first phase. And in the first phase, it belonged to Metternich. Completely, it belonged to Metternich. This chancellor of Austria really knew how to tackle it up. He crushed the 1830 revolution that took place, and he even had all the things. Basically, the effort was what on his part. He wanted that old regime should be back. Even France, like after Napoleon, they even compensated the king up who followed Louis XVI and 17, and eventually they had him back on the throne. So basically, they tried their level best to have the things back to the normal phase where they used to be, and they were quite successful in it. Especially if we talk about Metternich, he was someone who really eventually could do that because of his intellectuality, his presence, his sharp mindedness. Each and everything just went along with this guy, and I'll be discussing about him in the next lesson to follow up. That like what was his aura, and why is he recognized as such an awesome individual, and why does he have such a huge impact. So I'll be talking about him a bit in the next lesson, inshallah. But before that, I would like to even mention one thing up that basically the most important purpose that this guy had was what? That was restoration. He wanted to restore the old things that were there, and eventually that was the basic purpose that he eventually had, and restoration of all the old things that were there. As I had mentioned before, the the entire concept of Europe, it can be divided, and the entire period or this time duration can be divided into two phases. And the first phase eventually belonged to Metternich. And in the first phase, there is one thing that is literally very important, and that thing was what? It's basically, even if we talk about it, there was a congress that was held in Vienna. This is even known as that Congress, and the basic purpose of it was what? That all the superpowers at that time at Europe, they unite and they pledge with each other that they're not going to fight among each other in the future. But they were unaware of this thing, that whatever plans they have in mind, they are literally not going to work out, and eventually they may come across each other in the future, and that would be something which is going to come really quite soon. So, the first flaw, the most important flaw that I always felt was what? These countries, when they joined together, it was a good sign. It was something which was really good, but there was an alliance which was formed among these superpowers. Like there was an holy alliance which was formed within the concert, and that alliance was between the kingdom of Prussia, it was Austria, and it was Russia. All these formed a holy alliance, and this holy alliance was something that had the traditional monarchism in it, and at the same time, even if you have a look at it, the Sultan Mahmud II of the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Empire even entered into it. Well, if I talk about it in a simple words, the Ottoman Empire never thought that entering it up, it would be their thing, but eventually it had to be a part of any, part. And eventually when the Ottoman Empire came up, and then we see the World War One, and after the World War One, we very well know how the Ottoman Empire just broke up and how, it simply got divided, and how the Turkish portion was, half of it was annexed on one part, and so again, and so on, like that. So that's rest is all history. So this is what happened, and then this was the whole thing that went along. Then this whole setup, the concept of Europe that was there, it formed a Congress system that was there. The basic thing that was there in this, in the Congress of Vienna, which they've been discussed, all the decisions that are going to be eventually taken off by them, those decisions are going to be done on a joint thing. All of them are going to be sitting down together, they're going to be having discussions, and then eventually they're going to be coming up with a certain point. And that is going to be something which is literally very, very important. So this is how the entire decisions were taken on their part, and they had a plan in mind that, like, this is how the things are going to go along. They had different sorts of meetings that took place. I won't even I won't go into the detail of all those meetings up. I'll just tell you about it. There was like Congress of in 1818, there was the Congress of Chapel, then the Congress of Trapu, then there was the Congress of Leipzig. They're like 1818, 20, 21, 1822, we had the Congress of Verona. Like all these congresses were there were for what? They were there for the, eventually they were there for the purpose of having the things getting sorted out. But as I've mentioned before, the Holy Alliance that was formed. So the Holy Alliance that was eventually formed, it really, set the trend up. And there was division among all of them. So they were not together. And eventually, if they were not together, things eventually had to change on. And that is what happened. They witnessed it, and that's how the things went along. The next thing that we're going to be discussing about is going to be what? After all these alliances that went along, then in 1830, we came across a revolution. And this Congress met in the London Conference in 1830. And in this thing, that all the, superpowers, they just got together, they had a discussion, and it was to crush the revolutionaries because of the fact that people still wanted, freedom, as they had seen what freedom could do. And especially when in France they saw it, eventually other countries who were present, they also had that urge in them. But because of the fact that all of them were together, so this thing literally got pressed up. It was basically a Belgian revolution that took place in the year 1830. And because of that Belgian revolution, the kingdom of Netherlands, it eventually, I would say that, like Austria, Prussia, and Russia, they saw the Belgian separation, and eventually they intervened into it. And with the passage of time, they just crushed it down and brought the things back to normal. And now, if we even have a look at it, France was even included into it. So now we see that France is also a member of all these six communities. All right, guys. So we were going to be talking about this thing that, like, was the decline of the first phase. Well, the decline of the first phase happened after the 1848 event, And it was basically the revolution of 1848 that literally, was the first dent that I would say that happened over there. Although its impact was there, but it led to a very important thing in the history as far as Europeans are concerned. And after that, I would say this thing up that, like, although the 1848 revolution, it was not having so much of impact as the French Revolution had, but it had a huge impact in this regard that people again had the element of hope in them, and there were certain uprisings that eventually popped up. Then we talk about the Crimean War that happened after that, and the Crimean War, and it resulted in again another Congress of Paris that happened. But if I talk about it, it was something that, like, it's literally very important. Why am I saying it's something which is literally very important? Because after this, we come across the War of National Unification. And this is the time when the unification of Germany eventually happened. You guys need to understand one thing up, that unification of Germany was something that was literally the most important event which eventually led to the World War One. And it literally, had, because of the fact that, like, if we have a time at the look of Napoleon, it was all the coast of Rhine and all those countries, like areas, or all those places were simply scattered, they were not unified. But now we come across a unified area, and that unified is going to be two unifications that eventually took place: the Italian unification and the German unification. And both of them eventually were the cause of, the unsuccessfulness of this, thing that was going on. After that, we eventually move on to, the second phase. And the second phase, it was typically, if I talk about it, as I told you, people are from 1880s to 1940. And 1940 eventually marked the World War One, and that was the end of the entire concept of Europe. Now, what basically was this? Like, if we sum it up, the main thing, it was the revival of the Great Power Conference that eventually was there. And like, all the superpowers who were there, they wanted to revive themselves up. But the decline of the second phase was something that is literally the key thing that I always say to you people, which was, over there, which happened. And that is something that literally drove everyone. And after that, we came across two different sections again. And those two different sections were the ones that eventually decided what the entire future of the European history is going to go on with. So if we have a look at it, then we again see, like, a formation of two different groups that eventually led to the First World War. Now, basically, at the end, if I sum it up, that the entire concept of Europe, it happened. It was a good initiative which was taken as far as the old regime followers are concerned. I won't say that it's a good thing that happened eventually for the revolutionaries, but it was something that, like, all the powers who were there who wanted the old regime back, obviously they knew this thing very well, that the things cannot be from what it used to be. There is going to be change in it, and the change is something that they have to accept, but they try their level best to bring it as close as they can, so that all the things that are there, they eventually are like that. And the most important thing that I want to tell you people over here is what the thing that led it was, what, guys, and that is the rise of nationalism. The rise of nationalism in Europe was something that was not present before that. In France, we witnessed the French Revolution, but there was no concept of nationalism that was there. But if we have a look at all the revolutions that followed it up, especially if we have a look at this revolution of the 1830 and 1848, after that, the things that we see clearly tell us one thing. And what do they tell us? They tell us this thing out, that yes, they were meant to be there and they were meant to be united. And then eventually what we saw was that the rise of nationalism was something that drove people, on this phase, that they moved on, they learned a lot, and they knew how to, jingle up with each other and how to fight as a nation. Before that, they were completely scattered with their own personal motives. So, if I sum it up, the flaw that happened, it was obviously the absence of Metternich first, because he was an extraordinary individual. And after that, if we have a look at it, no one could ever take it on. Like the collective effort that was there. And if I again would like to mention this thing up, that having a holy alliance that formed up, it was also something that led to it. So guys, this was the lecture that we guys had of the concept of Europe for today. I hope you all enjoyed it up. I want all of you to subscribe to the channel if you have not done that till now. Press the bell icon and remember one thing up. Do share the videos up for as many, like to as many people as you can, so that like all those individuals who are the CSS aspirants, they can learn something out of it. Because the lectures that are being delivered over here are especially for you people, and it's behind and because of a very important purpose that's there. I want you people to learn something and learn the history with depth. Because if history is something, and especially if we talk about European history, you really need to, push yourself up so that you can do really well in it. So, guys, that's a bye from my side. Take care. Allah Hafiz.